The Ienbit of Inwit. Works of religious instruction were among the most popular during the Middle Ages. Then Michael's or Michel's Ienbit of Inwit, which means the again-biting of the inner wit or remorse of conscience, is a translation of the French Somme des Vices et des Vertus, a treatise dealing with the Ten Commandments, the Creed, the Ave Maria, the Lord's Prayer, the seven deadly sins, and other doctrines of the Catholic religion. Michel tells us that he was a monk at St. Augustine's in Canterbury, and that he wrote the work at Canterbury in 1340. His spelling reveals a great deal, all that most people want to know, certainly, about the Kentish dialect of Canterbury in the 1300s, with its use of voiced initial F and S to V and Z, and in its southern pronouns ham and hara for the northern them and there, which have become standard for us. Dan Michel's Ienbit of Inwit. No ich wille that ye witte, hoe it is he went, that this book is he writte mid English of Kent. This book is he mad voor leeuwde men, voor vader en voor moeder en voor other ken, ham voor te berwe from alle manner zin, that in her inwit ne blijve no voel wen. Who as God is his naam is said, that this book made, God him giveth that bread of angelus of heaven, and thereto his read, and underfong his soul, when that he is dead. Amen. Emende. That this book is fulfilled in the ave of the holy apostles Simon and Judas, of an brother of the cloister of St. Austin of Canterbury, in the year of our Lord's bearing, 1340. Vader oor that art in heavenis, hallowed be thy name. Come into thy riche, worth thy will as in heaven and in earth. Bread oor each days, give us today, and forlet us oor geldinges, as and we forletteth oor gelders, and us leid nacht into wandingen, ak vree us from kwade. So be it. Robert Manning's Story of England. Between the mid-12th and mid-14th centuries, historical writing in English disappeared because French and Latin had become the languages of the court. Robert Manning, a Lincolnshire monk, was one of the first to use English again for a chronicle. He wrote the Story of England about 1338 to inform and entertain the unlearned common man who knew only English, using a very simple style and, of course, his own East Midlands dialect, which sounds more familiar to us than most Middle English dialects do, because, by an accident of history and geography, it is the origin of our standard modern English. Robert Manning's Story of England. Lordinges that be nu here, if ye will listen and lear, all the story of England, als Robert Manning written it found, and on English has it shewed, not for the learned, but for the learned. For though that in this land of one, that the Latin no Francus con, for to have solace and garmin in fellowship when they sit salmon. And it is wisdom for to witten the start of the land, and have it written what manner of folk first it won, and of what kind it first begun. And good it is for many things for to hear the deeds of kings. Whilk were foles, and whilk were wise, and whilk of them could the most quantise, and whilk did wrong, and whilk richt, and whilk maintained pace and ficht. Als they have written and said, have he all in English laid, in simple speech, as he coulde, that is lichtes in mannes mouthe. He mad nocht for no disures, ne for no sedgers, no harpoors, but for the love of simple men that stranger English cannot ken. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. During the 14th century, the London dialect of the South-East Midlands was becoming the chief form of English because of the social, economic, political importance of the area in which it was spoken. Chaucer certainly gave that dialect a new prestige as a literary medium. He adapted French genre and verse forms into English, combining the syllabic French line with the accentual English poetic line. The Canterbury Tales illustrate the smoothness of Chaucer's verse, as well as his wide range of styles, from colloquial to highly rhetorical, often in the same passage. A passage like the opening lines of the general prologue, where Zephyrus and astrology get mixed up with amorous birds and pious pilgrims. You'll notice, too, a regular barrage of French and Latin loanwords in the opening clauses. 8 of them in the first 4 lines, if you count the words April and March, which ought to make this long, formal sentence seem strained, elevated, exotic, but doesn't. Geoffrey Chaucer's general prologue to the Canterbury Tales. When that April with his shore is sought, the drought of March hath persed to the road, and bathed every vine in switch liqueur, of which virtue engendered is the flour. When Zephyrus eke with his sweet breath in spirit hath in every halt and hath the tender croppus, and the younge sun hath in the ram his halve course y run, and small a fool is maken melodie, that slepen all the night with open eye, so pricketh in natuur and her courageous. Then longen folk to gon on pilgrimages, and palmers for to seken strange strandes to ferne halwes couth in sundry landes, and specially from every sheerest end of England to Canterbury they wend, the holy blissful martyr for to sake, that am hath holpen one that they were sake. Befell that in that season, on a day, in Southwark, at the tabard, as he lay, ready to winden on me pilgrimage to Canterbury with full devout courage, at night was come to that hostelrie, well 29 in a compagnie of sundry folk, be aventuri fall in fellowship, and pilgrims were they all, that toward Canterbury woulden read. The chambers and the stables were in weed, and well we were in aised at the best. And shortly, when the sun was to rest, so had he spoken with them every chon, that he was of their fellowship anon, and made forward early for to rease, to tak our way, there is you to vise. But natheless, while he have time and space, ere that he further in his tale passe, may thinketh it accordant to reason to tell you all the condition of each of them, so as it seemed may, and which they were in, and of what degree, and eken what array that they were in. And at a knicht, then will he first begin. Chaucer's treatise on the astrolabe. Chaucer is best known as a poet, but he also translated various prose works from French or Latin into English. His prose, like his verse, shows a strong French influence. His only surviving piece of original prose is the introduction to the treatise on the astrolabe, written to teach his son Louis how to work the instrument. Chaucer defends the use of English for this purpose, and uses a simple expository style for the purpose of instruction. The medieval French prose, which was his model, though not directly for this particular piece, was characterized by a trailing sentence structure in which clauses were loosely joined by linking connectives such as car, for, c'est-à-dire, that is to say, and so on. Chaucer's prose very much shows the influence of this kind of model. You will notice many similar trailing sentences in the following selection. Geoffrey Chaucer's Treatise on the Astrolabe. Little Lois, my son, I apperceive well by certain evidences thine ability to learn sciences touching numbers and proportions, and as well consider thee busy prayer in special to learn the treatise of the astrolabe. Then for as much as a philosopher saith, he wrappeth him in his friend, that condescendeth to the richtful prayers of his friend. Therefore have I given thee a sufficient astrolabe as for our horizonte, componed after the latitude of Oxenford, upon which, by mediation of this little treatise, I purpose to teach thee a certain number of conclusions appertaining to the same instrument. I say a certain of conclusions for three causes. The first cause is this: trust well that all of the conclusions that han been found, or else possibly michten be found in so noble an instrument as is an astrolabe, ben unknown perfectly to any mortal man in this region, as ye suppose. Another cause is this, that sothly, in any treatise of the astrolabe that ye have seen, there be some conclusions that will not in all things perform her behestes, and some of them being too hard to the tender age of 10 year to conceive. This treatise, divided in 5 parties, will I show thee under full licht rules and naked words in English, for Latin ne canst du yet but small, me little son. But natheless, suffice to thee these trewe conclusions in English, as well as sufficeth to these noble clerkes Graecus these same conclusions in Greek, and to Arabians in Arabic, and to Jews in Hebrew, and the Latin folk in Latin, which Latin folk had 'em first, out of other divers languages, and written 'em in her own tongue, that is to say, in Latin. And God wot that in all these languages, and in many more, han these conclusions been sufficiently learned and taught, and yet be divers rules, reached as divers paths, leiden divers folk the richte way to Rome. Now will I pray makely every discreet person that readeth or heareth this little treatise, to have me rude in deating for excused, and me superfluity of words, for 2 causes. First cause is for the curious and deating and hard sentence is full heavy at honest for such a child to learn. And the second cause is this, that sothly me seemeth better to written unto a child twice a good sentence, than he forget it honest. Richard Rolls, The Bee and the Stork. One of the best prose writers of the 14th century was Richard Rolle, a mystic who lived in Yorkshire. He wrote many religious treatises in Latin and English, the English works being written mostly during his later years for his women disciples. His basic style seems almost modern in its idiomatic phrasing, but the rhetorical flourishes of that style, with its use of alliteration and rhythmic phrases, hark back to the ornate styles of Alfric and Wulfstan. A series of rhyming present participles is a favorite device of his. You will hear one such series in lines 8 and 9. Prayand, thinkand, redand, doand, with takand, shewand. Some of the sounds of his northern dialect are also closer to Old English than those of Chaucer. Richard Rolls, The Bee and the Stork. The bee has 3 kindes. Ane is that showeth never idle, and showeth not with them that will not work, but casteth them out, and putteth them away. Another is that when she flees, she taketh earth in her fate, that she be not lichtly overhead in the air of wind. The third is that she keepeth clean and breached her wings. Thus recht wise men that loveth God are never in idleness, or other they are in travail, prayand, or thinkand, or redand, or other good doend, or with takend idle men and showend them worthy to be put fra the rest of heaven, for they will not travail. Here they take earth, that is, they hold themselves veal and earthly, that they be not blown with the wind of vanity and of pride. They keep their wings clean, that is, the 2 commandments of charity they fulfill in good conscience, and they have other virtues unblended with the filth of sin and unclean lust. Aristotle says that the bees are fechtend against them that will draw their honey fra them. So should we do against devils that forces them to rave fra us the honey of poor leaf and of grass. For many are that never can hold the order of love innens their friendes, sib or fremede, but other they love them over mickle, settend their thought unrichtwisely on them, or they love them over little, if they do not all as they wold to them. Swilk can not ficht for their honey, for the devil turns it to wormwood, and makes their soulest oft to see this full bitter in anguish, and pain, and busyness of vain thoughts, and other wretchedness. For they are so heavy in earthly friendship, that they may not flee into the love of Jesu Christ, in the whilk they mocht well forego the love of all creatures living in earth. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The technique of composing alliterative poetry in English apparently never was lost after Old English times. It was revived in written verse during the 14th century, particularly in the North and West Midlands. One of the finest works written in this metre, and probably the best romance in English, was Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The poem illustrates the rich patterns of alliteration, the complex stanza forms, the elaborate poetic vocabulary that characterized this Middle English alliterative verse. For example, in the selection you're going to hear the various synonyms for man or warrior, which are necessary for the differing alliteration of different lines, include the word man, the word sedge, which is Old English, the word duke, which is Old French, the word knecht, Old English, sire, Old French, rink, Old English and Old Norse, gom, Old English, frek, Old English, prince, Old French, lud, Old English, lord, Old English, and bourne, Old English. That's 12 synonyms, 12 words in which only 2 pairs alliterate on the same sounds. You can see the great utility of this kind of synonym vocabulary for poetry of this kind. A great richness of language which makes poetry of this kind possible. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. He spurred the steed with the spurs, and sprung on his way, so stiff that the stone fear struck out thereafter. All that say that samely sick it in hurt, and sighed softly all some sedges till other, carrind for that comely, be Christ it is scath, that thou, lewd, shall be lost, that art of lief noble. To find his fair upon fold, in faith, is not aid. Warlooker to have rocht, had more wit bane, and have dicht yonder dare a duke to have worthed. A lowend lader of ladies and longed him well sameas, and so had better have been than Britned to nocht, had it with an Alvish man for Angardis pride. How knew ever any king such counsel to take, as knichtis in cavalations on Christmas gomnes? Well much was the warm water that Walter of Ian, when that samely seer socht fro the warness that day. He mad anon aboard, but wichtly went his way, money wilsome way he rode, the book as he heard say. Nu readest this rink through the realm of Logres, Sir Gawain on God's half, tho him no gamen vocht. Oft ludless alone he lenges on nichtes, there he fond nocht him before the fare that he leaked. Had he no fare but his fall, be frites and dones, no gom but God be got with to carp, till that a neighed full neich into the north wireless. All the eels of Anglesey on lift half he haldis, and far as over the fordis be the forlongest, over at the Holyhead, till he had eft bunk in the wilderness of Wirral, want there but lit that other god other gom with gold hairt loved. And I he fryned as he fared at freckes that he met, if I had heard any carp of a knicht grain, in any grund thereabout, of the grain chapel, and all nicked him with nigh, that never in her leave they say never no sedge that was of such herewis of grain. The knicht took got his Chaunge in many a bunk and bane, his chair full oft con Chaunge that chapel he micht seen.